We're going to continue solving trinomials and binomials also. When we're looking at letter A, what we're going to do is we're going to look for two numbers that multiply together, give us 10, and add up to 11, and that would be 10 and 1. So that gives us x plus 10 and x plus 1. And looking at this, if you remember from last time, what we're trying to do is figure out what gives us 0. And based off of 0 property, that means anything times 0 is equal to 0. We want to figure out what gives us a 0 here, and we stated that it's the opposite. And then what gives us a 0 here would be -1. So looking at the next one, we're looking for two numbers that multiply together, give us 25 and -10. That would be -5 and -5. This is a square binomial. That would be x minus 5 squared. This one right here, there's only one 0. The only number that makes this 0 is 5. So x is equal to 5. Versus the other ones that we've been looking at, this case it's 2, and the one that we did the other day, there were 2 and sometimes 3. Here, it's a special factoring pattern because we could take the square root of both of them. So x minus 7 and x plus 7. And when we do the opposites, we get 7 or -7. So pause the video and try those next three. If we're looking at the next one, two numbers that multiply together give us 4, add up to -4, and that would be -2 and -2. So once again, we have a square binomial. And what gives us a 0 inside here is a 2, so x is equal to 2. For letter E, two numbers that multiply together give us 4, add up to -5. That would be -4 and -1. So we have x minus 4 and x minus 1 is equal to 0. So our two answers are 4 or 1. And for letter F, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take the square root, and when we do that, we get x minus 9 and x plus 9. So x is equal to 9 or -9. Now, for our next example, what we're going to do is we're going to solve using the x method. And in this case, notice that we have leading coefficients. So for this right here, if you remember, we're going to use the x method, but we're going to multiply the 2 and the 7, and that gives us 14, and our linear term is 9. So two numbers that multiply together give us 14, add up to 9 would be 2 and 7. But remember, because of the leading coefficient, we divide each of them by 2, and that gives us x plus 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then what we have is x plus 7 over 2. So remember, we do the bottoms up, and we have x plus 1 and 2x plus 7 is equal to 0. And what gives us a 0? For the first one, it's really easy to see. It would be a -1. The opposite of 1 is -1. Now for this other one, it's actually better to look up here to figure out what gives us a 0. And notice that the opposite of 7/2 is going to be -7/2. Now what we could do is we could take this one and we could solve it if we wanted. 2x plus 7 is equal to 0. We subtract the 7, and we get 2x is equal to -7. And when we divide it by 2, notice we get the -7/2. So what I like to do is like to look at this first binomial, and that is more helpful for me than the actual second one. For the next one, because the leading coefficient, I'm going to multiply it. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply together, give me 42, and add up to -23. And that would be -21 and -2. Because of the leading coefficient of 3, I divide each of them by 3, and we get x minus 7. Negative 21 divided by 3 is negative 7. And then we have x minus 2/3. So x minus 7 and 3x minus 2 is equal to 0. When we're looking for our zeros, the opposite of negative 7 is 7. The opposite of negative 2/3 is 2/3. Now, looking at letter C, I see that they're all even, so I'm going to factor out a 2 first. And that gives me 4x squared minus 3x minus 1 equals 0. We still have a leading coefficient. So I'm going to multiply the 4 times the negative 1, and that gives us negative 4 and negative 3. So two numbers that multiply together give us negative 4. Add up to negative 3 would be negative 4 and 1. Our leading coefficient here is 4. Remember, we took out the 2, so we don't include it. We're just looking at the 4. So we're dividing each of these by 4, and that gives us x minus 1, and then we have an x plus 1/4. Bottoms up, and we get x minus 1 and 4x plus 1 is equal to 0. Now, when we're looking for the zeros, this is a monomial, but notice that there's no x. So we're not actually solving for that one. So 0 is not one of our answers. Our answers would be 1. And then with this fraction, the opposite of 1/4 is negative 1/4. Pause the video and try those next 3. With letter D, we're going to multiply the 2 and the 9, and that gives us 18 on top and 9 on the bottom. So 3 and 6. 3 times 6 is 18. 3 plus 6 gives us 9. Because of the leading coefficient of 2, we divide each of these by 2. That gives us x plus 3 over 2. And x plus 3 is equal to 0. Because of the fraction, we're going to do bottoms up, and 2x plus 3 and x plus 3 is equal to 0. We're looking to see what gives the binomial 0, and for the first one, it would be negative 3/2, and for the second one, it would be negative 3. Now for letter E, once again, multiply the 3 and the 3, and that gives us 9. So two numbers that multiply together give us 9, add up to negative 10, negative 9, negative 1. Because the leading coefficient, we divide each of those by 3. So we have x minus 3, and we have x minus 1/3 is equal to 0. We're going to bring the bottom to the top, and we have x minus 3, 3x minus 1 is equal to 0. Our zeros, what gives us a 0 here is 3. What gives us a 0 here is 1/3. Now for our last one, we see that they're all even. So we know that they're all divisible by 2. So I factor out a 2, and I get 2x squared minus 15x plus 25 is equal to 0. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply together, and 50. They multiply to 50 and add up to negative 15, and that would be negative 5 and negative 10. Once again, because the leading coefficient of 2, we don't take the 2 on the outside, only the 2 that's on the inside that we're factoring. And when we divide it by 2, what we get is x minus 5/2. And then x minus 5 is equal to 0. I bring the bottom to the top, and we get 2x minus 5, and then x minus 5 is equal to 0. So when we're looking for our zeros, opposite of negative 5 halves is 5 halves. Opposite of negative 5 is 5. Remember, we're not counting the 2 because the 2 doesn't have an x.